Good morning, Highland. Something I saw in the news really impressed me, and I wanted to begin there. In London, there was a Black Lives Matter protest, and there were far-right white counter-protesters, and obviously that's a volatile situation. A white right-wing man got knocked to the ground and injured, and he was in grave danger. And a man named Patrick Hutchinson picked him up and carried him out of the crowd to the police, to safety. Hutchinson is a black man. Hutchinson is a grandfather. I think of the passage in the Sermon on the Mount about loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you. And I think about Skye Jethani, who was the former editor of Christianity Today. She was teaching a class on the Sermon on the Mount, which contains the core teachings of faith about compassion and forgiveness and about loving your enemies. She had a class full of lifelong evangelicals, and they read the Sermon on the Mount aloud together. And then she asked, how many of you think Jesus actually expects us to live up to those commands? Nobody raised their hands. Nobody. And they said, quote, it's not possible to live that way. Others said, nobody can attain that. And she said these lifelong churchgoers used all kinds of logical contortions to nullify the teachings of Jesus. And yet, a black grandfather carried his wounded enemy to safety. Let me quote something that Jethani wrote. If I can find it. I didn't bring it with me. She said, although Christians often claim to be marginalized for taking Jesus too seriously, I'm convinced it's the opposite. The negative perception of evangelicals in America is caused by our not taking Jesus seriously enough. Venerating the scriptures while disregarding their teachings is exactly why Jesus called the religious leaders of his day hypocrites. My question is, what if? What if Jesus meant these things in the Sermon on the Mount and other teachings? What if the Old Testament prophets meant those words about doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly with God? We're at a very crucial moment in history where we make choices about how do we live to protect others or whether we're going to do that or not. And it is to our everlasting shame that the issue of wearing a mask in public has been politicized. We're at that moment in history where we're deciding about equality for all races. What if? What if Jesus really meant those things about loving your neighbor and loving your enemies and about a gospel for all? It seems to me that we're all born into a particular culture at a particular time, and that we absorb the religion of those who are all about us. We just kind of take it in with mama's milk. And we become a mirror reflecting our surroundings. And then life happens. Some tragedy, some grief, some self-awareness, some education. And that cultural faith, that cultural religion just shreds like old rags. But it's also an opportunity to forge one's own faith in the crucible of human experience, to decide what faith looks like now when an enemy lies broken on the ground. In Houston, Texas, the 3rd Ward is a rough place. Many of us would probably be afraid to even go there. There was a man there who was deeply involved in mentoring young people in faith. He helped out with a basketball outreach program. He served as a bridge to the community. He's quoted as saying, if you're all about God's business, then that's my business. This same man moved to Minneapolis, where he died with an officer's knee on his neck. And you know his name, George Floyd. What does faith look like now in these moments? I think about the weddings that I conduct and young people making vows to each other in sickness and in health and for wealth and poverty. But I'm pretty convinced that we really mean in health and wealth. But the time will come when life catches up and we'll decide what it means to be faithful when illness comes. I recall a friend of mine of many years, in his daily trips to the nursing home for his wife who had dementia and rubbing lotion on her feet, even though she didn't remember his name. At some point, we have to define what those vows mean. So I ask, what does faith look like for you today? For me, it looks like a black man protesting for justice, for equality, while practicing mercy on a fallen enemy. Have a good day, Highland. Amen.